John Kennedy dismantles woke host. His reply stunned everyone. The studio hummed with a carefully planned buzz. Current of expectation that sizzled like static electricity. The Melissa Carter Show, a powerhouse in the realm of daytime broadcasting, was famous for its polished production, razor-edged interviews, and a host who could make even the most experienced public officials sweat. Melissa Carter herself waited backstage, her perfectly cut blazer catching the light as she shuffled through a pile of cue cards, each one deliberately made to fulfill a single aim: to break down the guest sitting opposite her. In just a few minutes, that guest was John Kennedy, the longtime senator from Louisiana, a man whose laid-back charm and sharp humor had made him a staple in U.S. politics. But to Melissa and her squad, he represented something different, a throwback, a sign of a fading system ready for dismantling. The idea was clear: portray Kennedy as ancient, a man whose classic values and political beliefs didn't match a rapidly evolving society. If done right, the interview would catch fire online, a moment destined to blow up on social media, and lock in Melissa's legacy as the host who could knock down legends. The crowd had been handpicked. Some were real fans of Kennedy, their faces glowing with respect, while others were tactically placed doubters, set to turn on him at the perfect moment. Behind the scenes, producers clustered near screens, murmuring, last tweaks to shots and lighting. Everything was arranged to tell a story, one where Kennedy would slip and Melissa would rise victorious. In her dressing room, Melissa leaned into the mirror, her own image staring back with a self-assured grin. Her producer Jake hovered close, scribbling on a whiteboard, mapping out the ideal ambush. He's low-hanging fruit, Jake said, his voice soaked in confidence. John Kennedy. Come on, people buy into his whole Southern gentleman thing, but that's why it'll hit. He's too at ease, too expected. Melissa nodded, her eyes glowing. The world views him like this untouchable grandfather-type character, but we'll show them he's frozen in time, a lawmaker who doesn't relate anymore. She tossed a cue card on the table, its corners frayed from her anxious hands. We'll drill him with questions about progress, how his ideas don't fit with what's next. If he doubles down, we win. If he messes up, even better. Jake smirked, circling a main phrase on the whiteboard: outdated beliefs. In the audience, he asked. Melissa's grin widened. Half of them are ready to cheer like trained dogs, and the rest, they're set to challenge him. We've got this. The pieces were in place. The snare was locked. And Melissa knew she was on the verge of creating the viral moment everyone would be talking about. Meanwhile, across town, John Kennedy relaxed in the back of a dark SUV, the cityscape blurring by as he rode toward the studio. His phone pinged with alerts, team notes, constituent updates, the standard storm of a senator's day. But his gaze stayed locked on one message. It had landed in his inbox the week before. Its subject line bold and bold-faced. Exclusive invite. A straight talk on the Melissa Carter Show. Kennedy wasn't clueless he'd watched Melissa's program before, seen her slice through guests with the precision of a scalpel. Her knack for smart, surgical interviews was well known, especially with people like him, the kind who stood for a certain brand of old-school American ideals. He took a deep breath, his fingers tapping softly against the armrest. His aide sitting across from him glanced up from her tablet. You sure about this, Senator? Melissa's not exactly known for playing fair. Kennedy's lips curled into a faint smile, his Louisiana twang soft but intentional. I reckon I can manage a bit of conversation. The aide raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent. Kennedy's calm was unbreakable, a trait that had carried him through years of political storms. He knew what this was, an ambush dressed up like an interview, and still he'd taken the invite, not out of ego, but because he believed in meeting problems head-on. As the SUV stopped at the studio, a small group of bystanders gathered outside. The doors, some waving signs of support, others just observing. A security guard, his face lighting up at the sight of Kennedy, stepped forward. Big fan, Senator Love. What you do for Louisiana? Kennedy nodded, his smile kind but measured. Appreciate that, partner. The guard grinned, stepping aside as Kennedy walked into the building. The studio's interior was a flurry of motion. Crew members zipped between sets, adjusting lights and audio, while producers whispered into headsets. Didn't go unnoticed. Some staffers exchanged glances, a few thrilled, others doubtful. "That's him," one whispered. "Think he knows what he's stepping into?" Another shook her head. "No chance Melissa's going to tear him apart." But Kennedy, unbothered, followed a production assistant through a maze of hallways, into a green room where he quietly sipped a glass of water. His suit was simple, his posture easy, but his eyes were alert, scanning every inch. He could feel the buzz of pressure, the way the crew moved with urgency, the way the room felt, thick with energy. Backstage, Melissa was in her zone, reviewing her cards one final time. Each question was a precisely aimed dart meant to pierce Kennedy's composure. She'd start light, ease him into a sense of comfort, then hit with questions that would corner him on his record, his ideals, his entire place in today's politics. "We've got to make him look stiff," she told Jake, her voice low but fierce. "He's got this whole man-of-the-people stick, but we'll show the audience he's not in tune with where the nation's moving." Jake nodded, gesturing to a screen showing the crowd taking their seats. "We've got the right blend out. There's some will clap for him early on, but the rest, they're ready to jump once you give the cue." Melissa's eyes narrowed to Hunter, sizing up her meal. "Let's make sure the cameras grab every reaction. We want the internet to watch them break." The studio lights dimmed, signaling the beginning of the show. The audience settled in, a mixture of excitement and tension rippling through the seats. Some held signs with Kennedy's name. Others sat with folded arms, their faces unreadable. The cameras rolled, catching every shot, Melissa's perfect grin, the sleek background, the buzz hanging in the room. Kennedy stepped from behind the curtain, his walk confident, his face giving nothing away. Some in the crowd clapped excitedly, while others watched him with doubtful eyes. He took his seat across from Melissa, his hands resting quietly in his lap. Melissa welcomed him with a flawless grin, her voice friendly and polished almost too smooth. "Senator John Kennedy, welcome to the show." The red light on the camera blinked, and the crowd applauded, though the sound was uneven, a blend of real excitement and cautious distance. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her tone smooth like silk. "We're so thrilled to have you here. Let's begin with a simple one. What do you feel about the future of American politics?" Kennedy's gaze met hers, a slight spark of amusement dancing in them. He knew the match had started. Melissa's smile was a facade, her question a neatly placed snare. The crowd leaned forward, some eager to hear his take, others waiting for him to trip. The producers watched inside the control room, their hands poised over switches, ready to grab the moment Kennedy slipped. But what nobody in the room realized, not Melissa, not her staff, not even the carefully chosen crowd, was that John Kennedy had already figured out the setup. His steady manner, his friendly smile, his slow, confident delivery, it wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. He'd stared down tougher settings than this, from fiery town halls to intense Senate panels, and as Melissa leaned forward, prepared to guide the conversation, Kennedy leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Well, Melissa," he began, his voice slow and measured, "I think the future's about folks coming together, not tearing one another down." The words were clear, almost casual, but they held a weight that made the room still. Melissa's grin flickered, just briefly, as she realized this wouldn't be as smooth as she'd hoped. The producers exchanged looks, their certainty slipping. The audience shifted in place, some nodding in support, others still expecting the clash Melissa had teased. She flipped to the next card, her tone sharpening slightly, a signal the temperature was rising. "That's a nice thought, Senator, but let's be honest. Politics these days is evolving. The old methods, the standard approaches, they're being challenged. Some claim they're holding us back. Do you think your kind of leadership still fits in this modern time?" It was the first actual jab, subtle but intentional, built to nudge Kennedy on defense, to cast him as someone out of step. The audience hushed, feeling the shift. A few of the planted doubters leaned forward, ready to escalate any slip, but Kennedy stayed steady. He tilted his head a touch, like he was genuinely weighing her words, then grinned. Believe leadership isn't about chasing trends. It's about doing what's right. Folks don't want leaders who follow fashion. They want leaders who listen. The room paused for a moment, his words landing heavy. Melissa's smile tightened. Her hands gripped the cards just a bit harder. She hadn't planned for him to pivot this smoothly, to flip her question into a declaration of values. The producers scribbled frantically, their murmurs rising. "He's flipping it on her," one said. "Ah! We need to turn up the pressure." "Ah!" Melissa felt it too. The slip in control. The narrative slipping. "That's a sweet way to phrase it," she said, her voice still pleasant, but edged. "But let's dive into some of your stances. You've spoken up for certain core values, and some critics believe those beliefs don't connect with younger Americans, with where the country is going. Don't you think holding on to the past could turn off the next generation?" It was a riskier step, a question meant to trap him, to push him into either defending or retreating. The crowd murmured again, some agreeing with Melissa, others locked onto Kennedy. The camera zoomed closer, poised to catch the slightest flicker. But Kennedy only chuckled, a soft, almost charming sound that gently took the edge off the moment. "Melissa, I don't think it's about holding on to anything. It's about honoring what works. Hard work, honesty, caring for your neighbor. You tell me, does that sound like history, or does that sound like what people still want today?" The question lingered in the air, not aggressive but sharp, throwing the spotlight back on her.
The audience shifted, a few clapping.
Gently, others trading looks. Melissa's grin slipped just slightly before she regrouped. She hadn't planned for him to toss the question back so smoothly, to flip her setup without even raising his voice. She looked at her producers, who were motioning for her to go to the next question to ramp things up. But Kennedy wasn't. Finished. He leaned in slightly, his tone still steady, his eyes locked in. "See, I think people are done being told what to believe. They want someone who'll sit down, listen, and speak honestly. That's what I aim to do, and I figure that's not going out of style anytime soon." The words hit like a soft thunder, plain but powerful. The crowd's reaction was instant, more clapping, louder now, even from those who'd been unsure in the beginning. Melissa's jaw tensed, her strategy unraveling with every sentence Kennedy delivered. She had to shift, and quickly, because John Kennedy wasn't just making it through her ambush. He was starting to flip the script, and they hadn't even reached the first commercial pause. The studio lights seemed to shine just a bit hotter as Melissa Carter leaned forward, her smile still poised. The first exchange hadn't gone as expected. John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, sat across from her, his demeanor as still as a southern evening. His faint grin disarmed the room, making her producers squirm slightly in the control booth. Melissa had counted on him stumbling, getting reactive under her pointed questions, but instead, he had brushed off her opener with that easygoing charm that left the audience murmuring their approval. She couldn't let him keep the advantage. Flipping to the next card, she straightened her back, her tone getting firmer, though still wrapped in friendly phrasing. "Senator Kennedy, you mentioned listening and supporting what works, and that's admirable," she said, her gaze fixed on his. "But let's be real here. Your political path has been grounded in a particular brand of traditionalism. Some would even label it conservatism, and that feels misaligned with today's progressive beliefs. Don't you think that kind of mindset risks pushing away a generation that's calling for something new?" The question was a blade, shaped to paint him as outdated, stuck in yesterday's ideals. And the audience responded, some nodding, along, others bracing for his next words. The cameras zoomed in, ready to catch him if he slipped. Kennedy cocked his head slightly, his eyes lighting up with a trace of amusement, like he'd been waiting on this turn. He leaned back in his seat, his hands calmly folded in his lap, and let the silence linger just long enough to make Melissa blink. "Well, Melissa," he began, his Louisiana drawl slow and measured, "I think folks want progress that's logical, not progress just for the sake of change. You don't toss a good motor by replacing the parts that work." The crowd chuckled lightly, some clapping again in agreement. Melissa's grin grew tighter, her fingers gripping the cards just a bit harder. Kennedy wasn't biting the hook. He wasn't getting flustered or thrown. Instead, he was guiding the conversation, and she could feel it. Slipping control, she pressed on, her tone becoming more direct. But Senator, your voting history on matters like social change and environmental policies, some say it shows a hesitation toward progress. How do you respond to people who claim you're holding back the future? It was a clean strike meant to make him defend his record or risk appearing rigid. The planted skeptics in the crowd leaned in, ready to support her framing.
Kennedy.
Didn't waver, he laughed again, a soft, disarming sound that seemed to ease the room. Melissa, I've been around long enough to know that progress is a word folks love to toss around when they want to sound right without running the numbers. The crowd laughed louder this time. Even some skeptics cracked grins. It leaned in slightly, his voice firm, but never hostile. I vote the way I do because I listen to the people back home. They're not sitting there waiting for the next grand idea from Washington. They're working hard, raising kids, trying. To get by, they want leaders who will defend what keeps their communities solid, not chase every flashy buzzword. The crowd burst into cheers, not only his supporters, but even those who weren't sure at first. Melissa's eyes flicked toward the control booth, where her producers whispered urgently, their screens lit up with crowd reactions. This wasn't the headline clip they'd prepped for. She needed to seize back momentum. Flipping to a different cue card, she changed direction, her tone taking on a sugary sweetness. That's a great way to connect with your base, Senator. What about the broader picture? The country's shifting in demographics, values, priorities, especially younger voters. They're pushing for leaders who support bold, future-focused policies. Don't you think clinging to old values could make you irrelevant to the next wave? It was a tougher shot, a question aimed at boxing him into admitting he was behind. The crowd quieted, catching the change in tone. A few planted critics nodded subtly, their looks smugged, but Kennedy just grinned, eyes fixed on hers. Irrelevant. He repeated, like tasting the word. Melissa, I don't think it's about staying relevant. It's about being authentic. People don't want leaders who shift with trends. They want someone who'll speak truth, even if it's not fashionable. He paused, letting it settle, then added, and if standing for what's right makes me irrelevant, well, I figure I'll take that bet. The crowd exploded with applause, the noise catching Melissa off guard. She forced a chuckle, but it was hollow, almost strained. That's a bold take, Senator, she said, trying to regain footing. Go deeper. Some of your critics say your method, your focus on classic values, can come across as polarizing, especially now, when unity feels so critical. How do you respond to that? It was her toughest push yet, a thinly veiled jab suggesting his beliefs were splitting the country. The producers leaned in closer to the screens, sensing they might finally have their viral bite. If Kennedy snapped here, they'd get their clip. But instead, he surprised everyone. He laughed, a true hearty sound that sliced through. The pressure like a blade. Divisive, he repeated, shaking his head. Melissa, I think people get divided when we stop hearing each other. I was taught to believe you don't build bridges by tearing down the other side. You build by sitting, talking, finding what you've got in common. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. That's not divisive, that's just being human. The room burst with applause, louder than before, and even some of the skeptics clapped, their certainty fading. Melissa's grin wavered, her confidence starting to crumble. She glanced at her cue cards, then at her producers, who were signaling for her to shift. She needed to strike harder, to find a weakness in his armor. That's a beautiful thought, Senator, she said, her tone now laced with urgency. But let's talk about action. Your critics argue your policies don't match the kind of unity you're describing. They claim you're stuck in a mindset. Ignores the problems of today's world. How do you defend that? It was her final card, a question crafted to make him seem disconnected and make him stumble. The audience leaned closer, the air thick with tension. Kennedy leaned back, his face unreadable for a second, then smiled again, that same calm, steady grin. Melissa, I don't defend anything, he said, his tone relaxed but steady. I do what I believe is right for the people I represent. And if that means I don't fit into someone's version of what's modern, well, I'm fine with that. Because at the end of the day, it's not about winning debates. It's about doing what's right for folks. The crowd cheered again, the applause deafening now. Melissa's face stiffened, her smile becoming a mask that barely hid her frustration. The producers were panicking, their whispers turning into frantic shouts inside the control booth. "He's flipping the whole thing," one muttered. "We need a commercial now." But it was too late. Kennedy had changed the story, not through anger or arrogance, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence that had won the room over. Melissa forced another grin, her voice tight. "Well, Senator, you definitely have a way with words. Let's head into a quick break, folks, but stay tuned. We'll be right back."
Act SD.
Cameras faded to commercial. The audience kept clapping, some even on their feet now, their faces glowing with admiration. Melissa's team scrambled, desperate to figure out how to save the storyline. But Kennedy just sat there, composed. As ever, his gaze sweeping the crowd, he recognized the trap and had completely flipped it. The real fight was still coming, and Melissa was about to realize that underestimating John Kennedy was a misstep she'd regret. The studio lights dimmed as the Melissa Carter show went to commercial, but the room still pulsed with energy, like the aftershock of a quake. The audience buzzed, still stirred by John Kennedy's calm takedown of Melissa Carter's targeted questions. They whispered among each other, some sharing wide-eyed glances, others already grabbing their phones to post reactions. The senator from Louisiana sat relaxed in his seat, his hands folded, his expression as peaceful as if he'd just wrapped up a light-hearted chat over coffee. Melissa, meanwhile, was visibly shaken, her perfect smile stretched thin as she sipped water and glanced at her cue cards. Her producers huddled in the booth were spiraling. "This isn't working," one snapped, slamming a clipboard down. "He's making her look like the antagonist," another producer, eyes glued to the screen streaming live social. Buzz groaned. "People are already tweeting clips. Look at this. Kennedy shines is trending." The game plan had been to portray Kennedy as a relic, a politician disconnected from the present, but he had flipped the scene. Now the internet was taking notice. Melissa's assistant rushed up to her during the break, whispering fast, "We need a reset, Melissa. He's winning them over." Melissa nodded, jaw clenched, but inside her self-assurance was unraveling. She had misjudged Kennedy, and now she was paying for it. As the break ended and the cameras rolled again, Melissa forced a glowing smile, her voice sliding back into its practiced ease. "Welcome back, folks. We're here with Senator John Kennedy, and it's definitely been a conversation to remember." The crowd clapped, but the applause was mixed, stronger from those moved by Kennedy's steady demeanor, more hesitant from the skeptics still holding on to Melissa's framing. She leaned in, determined to take back control. "Senator, before the break, you mentioned listening and doing what's right, but let's talk about perception. Some argue that your stance, your emphasis on traditional values can feel exclusive to those who don't share your worldview. How do you respond to that?" It was a calculated jab, a question crafted to frame Kennedy as polarizing, to force him into defending himself from a charge of intolerance. The producers leaned in toward their screens, hoping this might be the moment he cracked. The room quieted, everyone waiting for his reply. Kennedy tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if turning her words over in his mind. Then, with a slow, intentional smile, he answered his Louisiana drawl, smooth as ever. "Melissa, I think people get tired of being told they're wrong just for believing what they believe. I don't shut out anyone. I listen to them. I talk with them. I might not agree with every person, but that don't mean I ignore them." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "See, the way I was raised, you don't put up walls over disagreement. You build connection by talking things through." The crowd erupted in applause again, and even some of the planted skeptics paused, their expressions softening. Melissa's smile twitched, her fingers gripping her cue cards a little tighter. She hadn't expected him to dodge the implications so smoothly, turning it into a message of unity that landed well with the crowd. The producers shared anxious looks. "He's flipping it again," one murmured. "He's rewriting the narrative." Melissa kept pushing her voice, now carrying a faint note of urgency. "That's a fine sentiment, Senator, but let's be honest. Politics today is about action, not just words. Some of your critics claim your record. Your votes don't match the kind of inclusivity you preach. How do you explain? That, it was her final swing. A question meant to nail him down, to make him look insincere. The crowd leaned in again, some nodding along with her, others watching Kennedy with quiet focus. But he only laughed, that same, easy, calming sound that seemed to melt the pressure in the air. "Melissa, I don't explain anything," he said, his tone still light, yet unshakable. "I vote my conscience based on what I hear from the folks I represent back home. They're the ones I work for, not the ones trying to look good on television." The crowd exploded, the clapping drowning out Melissa's next words. A few people rose, cheering with enthusiasm. Others raised their phones, capturing the moment. Melissa's face froze, her smile now a tight shell, barely concealing the frustration beneath. She glanced toward the control room where her producers were scrambling, their strategy falling apart in real time. By the time the segment ended, the damage was already done. Before the cameras even stopped recording, clips of Kennedy's replies were already spreading, posted by viewers who'd been live tweeting the segment. Hashtags like #KennedyShines and #RespectMatters began trending, alongside short clips of his calm, focused comebacks. "This man just taught her a lesson without even raising his voice." One user wrote, sharing a clip of Kennedy saying, "You don't build walls by disagreeing, you build understanding by talking it out." Another tweeted, "Melissa, Carter thought she had him cornered, but Kennedy's dropping truth bombs with a smile." TikTok lit up with clips of users reenacting the moment, mimicking Kennedy's calm voice and Melissa's tense grin. Instagram stories filled up with screenshots of the senator's composed expression, captioned with lines like "class act." "And this is how you handle an ambush." The producers, still in the control booth, watched in disbelief as their carefully crafted narrative unraveled. "We need to cut this before it airs," one yelled, but it was too late. Social media had already taken control.
Melissa,
Sensing the momentum shifting, chose to push back. After the episode, she filmed a short reaction video posting it to her social channels. "I've got nothing but respect for Senator Kennedy," she said, her smile visibly tight. "But let's be honest, this was a challenging conversation, and I was just asking the things people want answered. If folks can't deal with a bit of debate, maybe that's the actual problem." She tapped upload, hoping to reclaim the storyline. But the reaction was harsh. The comments flooded in, accusing her of trying to twist what happened. "You tried baiting him, and he made you look silly," one user wrote. "Kennedy didn't just answer you, he exposed the game," another added. The backlash wasn't just online. By the next morning, 2 major sponsors had called the network, voicing concerns about the show's tone. Melissa's assistant burst into her office, her face pale. "Melissa, we've got a real issue. The network's getting flooded, and the sponsors, they're not thrilled." Melissa tightened her jaw, staring at her screen where alerts kept rolling in, each one a reminder of the storm she'd sparked. Meanwhile, Kennedy had left the studio quietly, his energy just as calm as when he arrived. He stepped into his SUV, brushing past a small pack of reporters waiting nearby. One managed to get close, lifting a mic. "Any comment on the exchange?" "With Melissa Carter?" Kennedy paused, his smile small but genuine. "I think folks just want us to hear more and yell less," he said, then stepped into the car. The clip, barely 10 seconds long, went viral in hours, drawing millions of views. The internet had found its champion, and it wasn't Melissa Carter. Her show, once a ratings giant, was now teetering on the edge of full-blown fallout. Her producers scrambled to recover the situation, but the harm was done. Melissa had asked for a viral moment, and she got one, just not the one she had planned. And as the world kept echoing Kennedy's words, one thing was certain. The senator from Louisiana had walked into the setup, and walked out untouched, leaving Melissa behind to face the fallout of her own ambition. The Melissa Carter Show. Studio, once a hub of polished daytime drama, now felt like a sinking ship. The social media storm triggered by Kennedy's poised delivery during the interview had left. Melissa and her team scrambling to restore their credibility. Platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram buzzed nonstop, flooded with clips of Kennedy's cool, thoughtful replies, shared by the millions. Hashtags like #ListenMore and #KennedyShines trended around the globe, accompanied by memes, pairing Kennedy's composed face with Melissa's tightening expression. One especially viral TikTok looped Kennedy's quote, "You don't build walls by disagreeing. You build understanding by talking it out," over feel-good montages of people resolving conflicts with kindness, captioned, "This is how you win without yelling." News networks jumped on the story, breaking down every beat of the segment, with headlines like Senator Kennedy's school's host on civility and Melissa Carter's ambush backfires spectacularly. The public had picked a side, and it wasn't Melissa's. Inside her office, the tension was thick. Her assistant stood near the door, gripping a tablet full of red notifications, sponsor exits, network ultimatums, and a wave of online criticism. "Melissa," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the network's calling an urgent meeting there, discussing the show's future." Melissa's expression was a mask of forced calm, but her hands gave her away, trembling slightly as she set down her coffee mug. She'd built a reputation on bold, confrontational interviews, but this time, she'd misread her opponent, and the consequences were stacking up. Melissa's last attempt to regain the upper hand was a desperate video she posted to her social channels, trying to reshape the narrative. "Of the utmost respect for Senator Kennedy," she said, her smile stiff and practiced. "My job is to ask tough questions and spark honest conversations. If that's been misunderstood, I regret that." But the apology, if it even qualified as one, landed like a brick. Social media users pounced, calling it fake. "Not sorry. She's just mad she lost," one commenter said. "Kennedy didn't just answer her. He exposed the game," another added. The backlash wasn't letting up. By sunrise, 3 major sponsors had pulled their backing, citing brand concerns, and the network was swamped with calls from advertisers demanding answers. Melissa's inbox overflowed with messages, including one chilling email from the exec's urgent meeting to discuss the show's direction. Be prepared. She knew what that meant. Her program, her reputation, was hanging by a thread. She'd set out to craft a viral moment to cement her brand as a fearless host who could challenge anyone, but instead, she'd handed John Kennedy a stage to shine, and the public was loving it. While Melissa wrestled with the fallout, Kennedy went on with his schedule, like the interview was just another stop in the day. He returned to Louisiana, meeting locals, attending public events, and handling Senate duties with the same quiet steadiness that had defined his image. He didn't respond to the online storm, didn't post statements or soak in the spotlight. His silence was loud, and it only amplified the effect. People saw it as humility, a refusal to play into the media circus, and it made them respect him more. Reporters surrounded him, hungry for a soundbite to extend the buzz. "Hey." One caught him outside a small diner, a paper coffee cup in hand. His blazer casually thrown over one shoulder. "Senator Kennedy, any thoughts on the Melissa Carter interview?" the journalist asked. Mike aimed up. Kennedy paused, his eyes narrowing with a slight knowing smile. "Folks just want us to listen more and argue less," he said, his tone calm and intentional. He tipped his head politely and walked away, leaving the reporter at a loss. The brief clip, barely one full sentence, exploded online, racking up millions of plays within hours. "This man is unshakable," one user tweeted. "He doesn't argue, he just tells the truth," another wrote. The #ListenMore surged, becoming a rallying phrase for those sick of toxic debate. The ripple effect was wide. Kennedy's words had ignited something deeper, not just political buzz, but a wave on how people connect. Blogs and op-eds applauded his tone with headlines like, "The Quiet Power of John Kennedy and Why Civility Wins in 2025 Teachers," started playing clips of the interview in class, encouraging discussions about respect and speaking with intention. One teacher posted, "Showed my students the Kennedy interview today. We talked about how to stay strong without tearing someone else down. That's a lesson they'll never forget." Community organizers quoted him at meetings urging people to approach disagreements with empathy rather than anger. The public was craving this message, tired of media drama crafted to provoke. They saw in Kennedy a symbol of strength through composure. His words, You don't build walls by disagreeing. You build understanding by talking it out. It became a mantra, printed on merch, shared in motivational threads, and even quoted during church services. It wasn't just about winning a point. It was about proving that real strength comes from staying grounded in your values even under fire. For Melissa, the consequences were brutal. The network meeting was a disaster. Executives grilled her about the tanking ratings, lost sponsors, and how the public now viewed her as manipulative. "You misjudged him," one snapped. "You thought you could corner someone like Kennedy, and now we're stuck fixing it." Melissa tried to defend herself, insisting she'd only done her duty, but the room was icy. The verdict was in. The Melissa Carter show would be restructured, its tone softened to avoid further fallout, but the damage had been dealt. Viewership kept dropping, and within a few weeks the network quietly canceled the show, replacing it with a safer, less polarizing program. Melissa tried to pivot, guest starring on other shows and pitching fresh projects, but her name was tainted. Social media had no mercy. Users trolled her failed takedown. She thought she could corner Kennedy, but he turned it around. With grace, one meme read, featuring her awkward smile beside Kennedy's steady look. Melissa read the comments quietly, her ambition now a distant echo. She'd hoped to control the storyline, but instead, she became a warning sign. The moral of the story was undeniable, and it spread far beyond the screen. John Kennedy hadn't won by yelling over Melissa or meeting her fire with fire. He won by listening, by responding with thought and respect, by never rising to the bait. His approach stood as proof that strength doesn't have to be loud. It's found in being real, in staying rooted in your beliefs. The public took that message to heart, sharing stories of how they'd used it in daily life, healing family fights, easing workplace tensions, or just having deeper conversations with old friends. Kennedy's conduct proved that talk doesn't need to be a contest, that by hearing more than we preach, by respecting others, we can find common ground even in high-stress moments. His line became a signal, urging folks to lean into dialogue, not division, to prioritize connection over conflict. For students, workers, and everyday people, it became a real lesson, showing how to stand strong without tearing anyone down. A message that would outlive the headlines and influence how people saw disagreements for years ahead. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a failed talk show or a viral clip. It was about the lasting strength of calm conviction. Melissa Carter had tried to bury John Kennedy, but in the process, she buried her own spotlight. Her career built on confrontation collapsed under the weight of her own miscalculations. Kennedy, meanwhile, stayed steady through the backlash, unbothered by the uproar. He didn't need to boast about a win. His presence said more than any tweet ever could. As people kept circulating his message, one truth remained. The power of listening, of standing tall with humility, was a gift we all needed. It reminded us that in a world so often ruled by noise and friction, the most impactful voice is the one that speaks with sincerity, poise, and heart.